The hopeless beginning. The sky was black with smoke. Ash drifted like snow over the ruined city. The once bright towers of stone and steel now lay broken. Fires burned without end. Shadows of machines moved through the streets, hunting, searching, killing. The aliens who once called this world their home now lived like ghosts. Hiding in silence, for many years they had fought, but the enemy never stopped. The machines were endless, cold, and merciless. They came without warning, without reason, and without pity. Every defense the aliens built was crushed. Every city that stood tall was turned into dust. Generations had grown up knowing only war, and now, the survivors whispered the same words over and over again. No one is coming to save us. In the darkness of the ruins, families huddled in basements. Children cried quietly while their parents tried to keep them calm. Every night they listened to the sky, waiting for the sound of ships, but only the enemy moved above, their patrols screaming like thunder. Hope was gone, replaced with silence and fear. The people no longer spoke of victory. They only spoke of survival. The leaders of the survivors met in secret, their voices low, their eyes tired. They said the same thing again and again. No other species will help us. They remembered the galaxy as it once was. Many great empires ruled the stars, powerful and rich. But when the machines came, those empires stayed silent. They did not want to risk their fleets. They did not want to bleed for strangers. So one by one, the alien races turned away. And the people of this broken world were left to die alone. The machines showed no weakness, no fear, no pause, no mercy. They moved like a storm of steel. They destroyed crops, poisoned water, and hunted every survivor they could find. The world was dying slowly and painfully. Even the strongest warriors had given up hope. They sat in silence, staring into the flames, waiting for the end. But in the shadows of despair, a small group of children asked a question. Why does no one help? US? The parents could not answer. They could only look away, their hearts heavy. The truth was simple and cruel. No one believed help would ever come. The galaxy had abandoned them. They were forgotten, lost, erased from memory. The days turned to weeks. The weeks turned to months. Every sunrise brought more destruction. Every night brought more screams. The survivors could no longer tell how long the war had lasted. To them, time itself felt broken. The world had no future, only shadows, only fear. Yet even in the darkest nights, stories spread in whispers. The old spoke of a race not often seen, a young species, small and strange. They said this species came from a blue world far away. They were not the oldest, not the richest, not the most powerful, but the stories claimed they were different. The survivors listened, but most laughed. They said no one would come, no one would care. Still, in the silence, the rumor did not die. One night, as the survivors hid in the ruins, a sound broke the silence. It was not the scream of the machines. It was not the thunder of burning skies. It was something else, a signal, sharp and clear, cutting through the static of despair. The survivors froze. The leaders leaned close to their radios. The voice was strange, heavy, and filled with strength. It spoke in simple words. You are not alone. The survivors gasped. Children stared at their parents. The parents stared at the sky. Was it real? Or was it only another cruel trick of the machines? But the message came again, stronger, louder, clearer. You are not alone. And then the word appeared on their screens, a name unknown to most of the galaxy, but feared by those who had fought them before. The survivors whispered it slowly, almost afraid. The name was humanity. The leaders of the survivors exchanged glances. They had heard rumors, old stories, broken whispers from travelers, stories of humans, the strange ones from the blue world. They had always been outsiders, always underestimated. But the stories spoke of their fire, their anger, their unbreakable will. Could it be true? Could these humans really be coming here, to this dying world, to fight the storm of machines? No one knew, but for the first time in many years, the survivors felt something strange. It was not fear, it was not despair, it was a spark, small and fragile. It was hope. And in the dark sky above, far beyond the ruined towers, lights moved. Not the cold red lights of the machines, but sharp, bright, fast-moving stars. The survivors lifted their eyes, their breath caught in their throats. And in that moment, they realized help had arrived, help had come like a storm. The shadow of humanity. The survivors could not sleep that night. The words from the radio echoed in their minds. You are not alone. No one had spoken such words. In years to them, hope was like a forgotten dream. But now it returned, sharp and burning, in the ruined shelters. Whispers filled the air. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Who are humans? Why would they help? US? Are they strong enough to fight the machines? No one knew the truth, but the rumor grew like fire in dry grass. The leaders sat together, their faces lit by dim light. They remembered fragments of stories. Traders and wanderers had once spoken of a species from a distant blue world, a young race, restless and wild. They were not counted among the great empires. They had no massive fleets like the Dominion, no ancient wisdom like the Elder Kin, no endless wealth like the Star Lords. Yet there was something different about them, something dangerous, something unpredictable. The machines had always crushed every foe with cold precision. But now, even the machines seemed uneasy. Their patrols doubled, their ships moved faster. They scanned the skies with nervous energy. The survivors had never seen the enemy act like this, and for the first time, the thought was born. Perhaps the machines feared these humans, in the hidden tunnels. The elders told the children old legends. They spoke of a war long ago, where humans had fought far greater enemies than themselves. They said the humans were not the strongest, but they never gave up. They fought with fire, with clever minds, and with hearts that refused to break. The children listened with wide eyes, the adults listened in silence. And for the first time in many years, a fragile smile appeared on tired faces. But not all believed. Some argued in anger. They are only rumors, one survivor said. No one would come this far for us, another added. They will die, and we will die with them, a third voice said. Fear and doubt clashed with hope and belief. The survivors were divided. Half of them wanted to believe the humans were real. Half of them feared it was only another cruel trick of fate. The machines moved closer to the last hiding places. The survivors prepared to run deeper underground. But then, a strange thing happened. The sky above screamed with fire. It was not the red flame of destruction. It was bright, fast, and alive. The survivors looked up and saw shapes racing through the clouds. Not enemy machines, but something else, human ships. They were not massive like the fleets of the great empires. They did not shine with endless power. Instead, they looked sharp, lean and dangerous, built for speed, built for war. The survivors gasped as the machines in orbit moved to intercept. The battle began above their world. The sky turned into a storm of light. The machines attacked in perfect lines. Their ships were vast, cold, and countless. But the human ships danced like predators. They moved fast, striking hard, disappearing before the machines could react. The survivors watched in awe. They had never seen such fighting. The humans fought not like soldiers of an empire, but like hunters, fierce and unyielding. One by one, machine ships exploded in fire. The survivors cried out, cheering for the first time in years. The children shouted the name, humans. Even the leaders stared in silence, their hearts racing with new hope. The impossible was happening before their eyes. But with every victory came danger. The machines adapted. They began to change tactics. Their numbers were still endless. The humans could not fight forever. The survivors whispered in fear. What if they fall? What if they leave us? But then the radio came alive again. A human voice, strong and steady, spoke, "We will not leave you." Those words cut deep into the hearts of the survivors. No empire had ever spoken such words. No one had ever promised to stay. The humans were strangers, yet they had chosen to fight. And for the first time in history, the survivors believed they were not forgotten. The battle raged above. Every explosion painted the sky in fire. The survivors huddled together, eyes fixed. On the heavens, they were no longer waiting for death. They were waiting for victory. Something inside them began to change. Something small but powerful. The shadow of despair was lifting. And in its place, the shadow of humanity spread. Even the enemy felt it, for the first time. The machines hesitated. For the first time, their endless march slowed, and in the silence of their cold logic, one truth burned bright. The storm of humanity had arrived. First contact, the world was quiet after the battle in the sky. Smoke drifted above the ruins, glowing red where the machines had fallen. For the first time in many years, the survivors looked upward without fear. The enemy was not gone, but they were wounded, and in that silence, something greater began. A human ship descended slowly through the dark clouds. It was not massive like the fleets of old empires. It did not shine with gold or endless power. Instead, it looked scarred, sharp, and alive. Every line of its frame spoke of war and survival. The survivors stared, their hearts racing. Could this really be real? Were humans truly here, walking into the fire with them? The ship landed on the broken ground outside the ruins. Dust rose in waves as the engines shut down. For a long moment, no one moved. The survivors hid behind shattered walls, afraid to approach. They had heard the legends, the rumors, the whispers, but they had never seen a human with their own eyes. The doors of the ship opened. Figures stepped out, covered in armor, carrying strange weapons. Their movements were sharp, their eyes scanning every shadow. They did not look like saviors. They looked like predators. But when one of them spoke, the sound carried not fear, but promise. "You are safe now," the survivors gasped. They understood the words, though the language was not their own. Something in the voice carried across every barrier. It was strong, steady, and alive with will. The children whispered, "Humans." The adults stood frozen, torn between fear and hope. No one had ever come this close to them without the intention to kill. No one had ever risked themselves to stand in the ruins. One of the leaders finally stepped forward. Her body trembled, but her eyes held courage. She faced the armored humans and asked in a broken voice, "Why? Why did you come?" For years the survivors had believed they were forgotten. They had believed no one cared. But here, standing in the fire, humans had arrived. The human soldier removed his helmet. His face was young but scarred, his eyes burning with something the survivors could not understand. He answered with words that cut through the silence. Because no one else would. The survivors felt their hearts shake. No empire had ever said such words. The great rulers of the galaxy had turned away. But the humans had stepped forward, not because they had to, not because it would make them stronger, but because they refused to watch another people die. The humans brought supplies from their ship: food, water, medicine, weapons. They moved with speed and discipline. Every motion showed they were ready for war. Yet at the same time, they cared for the weak. They bandaged the wounded. They gave food to the children first. The survivors watched in awe. How could such a young species carry such fire? Such compassion. The night grew darker, but the humans lit the ruins with light. The survivors gathered close, still afraid, still unsure. The children stared at the humans as if they were legends come to life. And in truth, they were, because in the eyes of the survivors, humanity had become more than flesh and blood. They had become the storm, but the machines were not blind. From the shadows of the sky, they prepared another strike. The enemy had watched, they had measured, and now they would test the strength of humanity. The ground trembled as the machines advanced, their eyes glowing red, their voices screaming like metal. The survivors panicked. They cried out, "They are coming again." The humans stood without fear. Their leader raised his weapon and spoke calmly, "Stay behind us." The survivors hesitated. They had never seen anyone face the machines without terror, but the humans moved forward. They set their defenses. They aimed their weapons. They were ready. The first wave of machines came like a storm of steel. The survivors covered their ears as the night filled with thunder. But the humans did not fall. Their weapons roared with fire. Their traps tore through the enemy ranks. They fought with fury, cleverness, and something more. They fought with rage for every innocent lost, and with love for every life they had chosen to protect. The survivors watched with wide eyes. The humans were not gods, not invincible. They bled. They struggled. They shouted with pain, but they did not break. They refused to break, and in that refusal, the survivors saw a truth more powerful than any empire. Humans were not just warriors. They were a storm that could never be stopped. When the last machine fell, silence returned. The humans stood among the wreckage, breathing hard, their armor scarred, but their eyes still burned bright. The leader lowered his weapon and looked back at the survivors. "You see," he said, his voice steady, "you are not alone anymore." Tears filled the eyes of the survivors. For the first time, they believed the words. Help had come. Not as a whisper, not as a dream, but as flesh, blood, and fire. Help had come in the form of humanity, and with them, hope returned, not fragile, not small, but strong, alive, and unstoppable. The survivors realized the galaxy had changed forever, because now they had seen the first true contact with humanity, and it was not the meeting of strangers. It was the meeting of saviors. The storm had arrived, and it would only grow stronger. Humanity's strike. The ruins were quiet after the last machine fell. Smoke curled into the air, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The survivors stood in silence, their hearts racing. They had seen the impossible with their own eyes. The machines, the monsters that had ruled their world for years, were defeated in open combat. Not by empires, not by ancient powers, but by humans. The human soldiers moved quickly, repairing their weapons, checking their wounded. They wasted no time in celebration. To them, victory was never safe, never final. The machines always returned. Stronger, faster, colder. But the survivors watched them with awe. Every step, every motion, showed something new. Discipline, unity, and fire. The human commander studied the horizon with sharp eyes. He did not smile. He did not rest. Instead, he spoke quietly into his radio. His words were quick, steady, and confident. The survivors could not understand the full meaning, but they could feel the energy. The humans were planning their next strike. One survivor whispered, "They do not wait for death. They go to meet it," another answered. "They fight as if the end itself fears them." No one had ever seen such courage. The survivors had hidden for years, hoping only to live another day. But the humans were different. They were hunters, not prey, and now the machines were the hunted. At dawn, the humans prepared to move. The commander called the survivors closer. He spoke in words that were simple and heavy with meaning. "If you want to live, stand with us." The survivors hesitated. Their bodies were weak, their weapons broken. But when they looked at the humans, they felt something stir inside. Hope. The humans shared weapons. Not advanced or shining, but reliable and strong. They showed the survivors how to hold them, how to aim, how to strike. The survivors had fought before, but never like this. The humans taught them speed, cunning, and precision. They taught them to fight not with fear, but with fury. When the machines came again, the battle was different. The humans did not wait behind walls. They moved out into the open, into the broken streets. They attacked first. Striking before the machines could prepare, explosions lit the ruins, echoing like thunder. The machines reeled back, unprepared for such aggression. For years they had only hunted the weak. Now they were being hunted in return. The survivors followed the humans, their fear turning into fire. They saw how the humans moved, how they fought. Every strike was sharp, every step full of purpose. The machines fell in waves, their perfect order shattered. The humans struck with chaos. But it was not madness, it was strategy. It was war born from survival. The enemy adapted quickly, as they always did. They sent larger machines, stronger, heavier, armored like fortresses. But the humans did not stop. They laid traps, they used the ruins as cover. They turned weakness into strength. And when the massive machines roared forward, the humans struck them down with fire from all sides. The survivors stared in disbelief. The machines were not unstoppable. They could bleed. They could fall. The humans had proved it. And the survivors, who once only ran, now stood and fought. Together they pushed the enemy back, step by step, street by street. By nightfall, the ruins were littered with broken steel. The machines had been driven away. The survivors gathered. In the shattered square, they looked at one another, and for the first time, they did not see victims. They saw fighters. They saw themselves as part of the storm. The human commander stood before them, his armor scarred, his voice calm. "You see now," he said, "the machines are not gods. They are not eternal. They can be broken." His words cut deep. The survivors nodded, their fear slowly replaced by resolve. The impossible was possible. The hopeless could hope again. But deep in the enemy lines, the machines processed every loss. They calculated, they adapted, and in their cold, mechanical thoughts, one truth repeated again and again: humanity was different, humanity was dangerous, and humanity had to be destroyed. The survivors did not know the scale of the storm they were standing in. They only knew this: the galaxy had watched them die in silence. But humans had come, not with promises, not with pity. They had come with fire, and they had struck like a storm. The storm awakens, the city ruins were quiet again. But this silence was not the silence of fear. It was the silence after victory. The survivors stood among broken machines, their hands still shaking. For the first time in years, they had fought and lived. For the first time in years, the enemy had fallen before them. The humans walked through the ruins, carrying supplies, checking wounds. They moved like fire, never resting, never slowing. Their commander spoke in short, sharp words: repair, reload, prepare. The survivors watched with wide eyes. Humans did not pause to celebrate. They prepared for the next battle, in the shelters. Children laughed for the first time. The sound was strange, almost forgotten. It echoed in the broken walls like music. Parents held them close, tears in their eyes. They whispered, "Maybe we will live, maybe tomorrow will come." Hope had returned. Not as a whisper, but as a flame. The humans shared more than food and weapons. They shared knowledge. They taught the survivors to build traps, to use the ruins against the machines. They showed them how to move in shadows, how to fight with speed and cunning. The survivors listened carefully, their fears slowly turning into strength. At night, the survivors gathered around small fires. The humans told stories of their own world, a blue planet filled with oceans and storms, a world where humans had always fought to survive, against nature, against enemies, against each other. But no matter the struggle, they never surrendered. The survivors listened in awe. They realized that humans were not just fighters, they were survivors, just like them. But humans carried something more, a fire that refused to die. As the days passed, the survivors changed. They no longer hid in silence. They no longer whispered only of death. They spoke of resistance. They spoke of striking back. They began to believe they could fight, not only because of the humans, but because humanity had given them the gift of courage. The machines felt the change too. Their sensors detected movements they had never seen before. Small groups of survivors ambushing, patrols, traps hidden in the ruins, explosions striking from shadows. For years, the machines had been hunters. Now they were being hunted. The human commander smiled for the first time. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator seeing the prey stumble. He looked at the survivors and spoke, "This is only the beginning." The survivors followed the humans into new battles. They struck supply lines. They destroyed enemy nests. Each victory was small, but each victory carried power. Every battle showed the machines they were no longer in control. In the ruins of one city, the survivors planted their banner again. It was torn, burned, and old, but it stood in the wind. Children touched it with trembling hands. Adults bowed their heads. The banner had not flown in years, but now it waved. Again, and it waved beside the human flag. The galaxy still turned in silence. Other empires still watched from afar. They saw the machines bleed. They saw humans rise. And whispers began to spread. Humanity has entered the war. The survivors did not hear those whispers. They only felt the fire inside their own hearts. For the first time, they saw a future, not certain, not safe, but possible. And that possibility was more powerful than any weapon. One night, as the survivors rested, a young child asked the human commander, "Why do you fight for us?" "We are not your people." The commander knelt, his scarred face lit by firelight. He answered in a steady voice, "Because one day, it could be us. And if we do not fight for you, who will fight for us?" The survivors fell silent. The truth of those words burned inside them. Humanity fought not only for victory, they fought because it was right. The storm was awake now. It lived in every survivor, in every human. It spread through the ruins. It spread through the stars. And though the machines still marched, though their numbers were endless, a shadow now followed them, the shadow of humanity. The survivors knew the war was not over. The hardest battles were yet to come. But now, they no longer stood alone. They stood with the storm, and when the storm moved, the galaxy would tremble. The turning tide, the war was changing. The survivors could feel it in every breath. For years they had hidden in shadows, broken and afraid. But now they walked with heads high, weapons in their hands. The machines still came, endless and merciless. Yet for the first time, the survivors no longer ran. They stood, they fought, and they lived. Humanity had given them more than weapons. They had given them a new vision of themselves. The humans moved like fire, but the survivors had become sparks. Together, they spread across the ruins, turning death into defiance. Every ambush struck like lightning. Every trap burned through enemy lines. And in the silence of their circuits, the machines began to hesitate. The human commander studied maps on broken screens. He traced enemy movements with sharp eyes. His voice was calm but fierce. "They adapt quickly," he said. "But so do we." The survivors leaned closer. They had never seen war fought like this. Not with fear, not with hopeless retreat, but with cunning, fury, and endless will. One night, the humans launched a raid deep into enemy territory. The survivors followed, nervous but determined. Through broken tunnels and shattered bridges they crept. The machines guarded a power core, glowing bright in the ruins. The humans whispered a single word, "Strike." The battle erupted in fire. The machines moved with cold precision, but the humans moved with chaos. Not wild, but sharp. They struck from shadows, disappeared, and struck again. The survivors mirrored them, learning every motion. Together, they overwhelmed the machines. The power core exploded, shaking the ground. And when the smoke cleared, the ruins burned with victory. The survivors cheered. They had never felt such power in their lives. The humans stood among them, breathing hard but smiling. "Do you see?" The commander said, "This is how they fall." The survivors nodded, their hearts alive with fire. The turning tide had begun. The machines, however, did not sleep. They rebuilt, recalculated. Their endless circuits processed the new threat. And in the cold logic of their minds, they recognized humanity as danger. Not like other races who cowered, but as predators. Predators who refused to surrender. The next wave of enemy attacks was greater than ever. Massive war machines, taller than towers, rolled into the ruins. The ground shook beneath their weight. The survivors panicked, but the humans did not. "Stay with us," the commander ordered, his voice steady, his eyes like steel. The humans spread into positions. They did not wait for death. They prepared to break it. The battle was chaos. Explosions tore through the night. The massive machines fired beams that melted stone, but the humans fought with fury. They used speed against size, cunning against strength. They struck at joints, at weak points. At the heart of the giants, survivors followed, shouting war cries they never thought they would. Speak again. Together, they brought the giants crashing down. When the dust cleared, the ruins stood silent again, and in that silence, hope thundered louder than fear. The survivors began to change even more. They no longer waited for humans to act. They led their own raids, their own ambushes. They no longer saw themselves as victims. They saw themselves as fighters, and the machines saw it too. The tide of war was turning, and at its center stood humanity, but victory carried a heavy cost. Many fell in battle, both human and alien. The survivors buried their dead side by side with human soldiers. They lit fires in their honor. They whispered words of respect in many tongues, and though grief filled their hearts, so did pride. For the first time, their dead had not fallen in vain. They had fallen in battle, fighting for freedom. The galaxy began to notice. Whispers spread through the stars. Humanity is rising. They strike like storms. They fight like no other race. The great empires still stayed silent, but their silence was no longer comfort. They watched with unease, because humanity was proving what no one else had dared to prove. The machines could be stopped. The survivors gathered one evening. They looked at the humans, their armor scarred, their faces tired. One of them spoke softly. "You came when no one else would." The human commander only nodded. His words were simple. "We will never leave you." The survivors bowed their heads, for in those words lay the truth of the storm. The tide was turning. The survivors could feel it in the earth, in the fire, in their own hearts, and though the war was far from over, they knew now that victory was not a dream. Victory was possible, and with humanity by their side. Victory was inevitable. The machines had ruled for years without challenge, but now they faced something greater than numbers or strength. They faced the storm of humanity, and the storm was only growing. The final blow. The war had reached its breaking point. The survivors could feel it in the air. The machines still marched, endless and merciless, but their steps were slower now, their formations weaker, their once perfect order cracked by fire and chaos. The tide had turned, but the war was not yet won. Humanity stood at the heart of the storm. Their ships circled above, scarred but unbroken. Their soldiers stood on the ground, tired but relentless. Every battle had tested them. Every strike had cost blood. But humanity did not retreat. They pressed forward, and with them, the survivors pressed forward too. The human commander gathered his forces. The survivors stood beside them, weapons ready. Maps were spread across broken tables. Voices rose and fell with urgency. At last the commander spoke. "This is it," he said. "We strike their core." The survivors gasped. No one had ever dared to think of such a thing. The machine's core was deep within their fortress, a place no one had ever reached, but the humans spoke with calm certainty. "It can be done." The survivors looked at each other. Fear trembled in their eyes. But behind the fear, something greater burned. Hope. If humanity believed it could be done, then maybe it was possible, and so they prepared. The march to the fortress was long and brutal. The machines threw everything they had, swarms of hunters, towers of steel, waves of endless drones. The humans fought without pause. Their weapons roared. Their voices shouted commands. The survivors followed, their courage no longer fragile. They struck with fire. They struck with rage. Every step forward was bought with blood, but every step forward brought them closer to the end. The fortress rose before them, black and endless. Its walls glowed with red light. Its towers reached into the clouds. The survivors stared in silence. It looked impossible. It looked eternal. But the humans only tightened their grips on their weapons. "Nothing is eternal," their commander said. "Not even them." The battle for the fortress began. Explosions shook the ground. The air turned to fire. The machines poured out in endless waves, but the humans did not break. They struck like storms, fast, sharp, unrelenting. The survivors fought beside them. Together they carved a path of fire through the steel horde. Inside the fortress, the walls hummed with dark power, the core pulsed like a beating heart. The machines drew strength from it, and as long as it lived, they would never fall. The humans knew this, the survivors knew this, and so they pushed forward with everything they had left. The fighting was brutal. Hallways became rivers of fire. Rooms turned into battlegrounds. The humans fought at the front, their armor glowing with heat. The survivors filled the gaps, striking with fury. The machines tried to adapt, but the storm was already inside, and the storm would not be stopped. At last, they reached the core. It glowed brighter than the sun. Its power roared like thunder. The survivors froze in awe. They had never seen such terrible beauty, but the humans did not stop to stare. The commander raised his weapon. "This ends now," he said. The machines rushed in for one final defense. The survivors screamed and fought. The humans struck with everything left in them. Blades clashed, fire roared, steel shattered. And then the commander fired. The core erupted in light. The fortress shook like the world itself was breaking. The machines screamed in unison, their voices cracking into silence, their bodies collapsing into dust. The ground split, the sky burned. But when the fire cleared, the fortress was gone. The machines were gone. Only silence remained. A silence not of fear, but of freedom. The survivors fell to their knees. They wept, they shouted, they clung to one another. For the first time in their lives they were free. The humans stood among them, scarred, bloody, and tired, but in their eyes burned the same fire, the fire that had carried them through every battle. One of the survivors whispered, "You came when no one else would." Another said, "You fought when no one dared." And a child's voice rose above them all, "You saved us." The humans did not smile. They only nodded, because to them, it was not about glory. It was about survival, about doing what had to be done. Word spread across the galaxy. The machines had fallen. Not to empires, not to ancient powers, but to humanity, the young race, the reckless race, the race that no one believed in. They had struck like a storm, and the storm had broken the unbreakable. The survivors rebuilt their world, stone by stone, fire by fire, and they did not rebuild alone, for humanity stayed with them. Teaching, guiding, fighting still. Together, they created something new, something stronger than fear, an alliance born not of power, but of blood, sacrifice, and hope. And as the survivors looked to the stars, they whispered the truth. They believed help would never arrive, but humanity struck like a storm.